everyone, welcome to Webstation. Today, we are going to walk you through the 3 ways you can submit e-invoices to the LHDM portal, which is Standard, Consolidated, and Self-Bill Invoice. You might be wondering, what's the difference between these 3? Don't worry, we'll break them down one by one in the following slides. Before that, let me give you a brief explanation between Standard, Consolidated, and Self-Bill Invoice. For the first one, Standard Invoice represents a single transaction per invoice and requires detailed information such as the company PIN, BRN, email, and phone number. And for Consolidated Invoice, this is used for transactions where the customer doesn't require a validated invoice or lacks of specific info like a TIN number. And lastly, for Self-Bill Invoice, this is usually for overseas purchase or expenses like rental. Don't worry, we will continue the 3 types of invoice in the following slides. Let's look at some of the example of the standard invoice. In AutoCount, the system automatically submits the invoice to My Invoice as long as you have a valid TIN number. Once LHDM processes it and all of the mandatory fields are correct, the status will update to valid. You might be worried that this will slow down your billing process, but it actually only takes about 3 to 5 seconds to get a response from the LHDM server, depending on traffic. What happens if you make a mistake or the customer needs to change the details? You can actually edit a submitted invoice within 72 hours. It's important to note that this 72 hours window includes weekend and public holidays, so the clock doesn't stop. If you miss that 72-hour window, don't worry, you can still adjust the transaction by issuing a credit note or debit note. Finally, don't forget to add the e-invoice QR code to your reports. You can simply copy the QR code component from the Malaysia e-invoice report and add it to your cash sales, invoice, credit note, and debit note report template. Next, let's look at the consolidated e-invoice. As we discussed, this combines multiple transactions within a certain date range into a single e-invoice with no detailed information. And this will combine all standard invoice that is not submitted or invalid and even cash sales. And one important thing is, this consolidated invoice must submit before next month 7, because 7 onward will have a penalty. And if your company has just started with e-invoicing, there is a 6-month relaxation period to help you transition and get used to the new workflow. And one key difference to remember, unlike standard e-invoice, the consolidated e-invoice do not have a QR code. And lastly, for the self-bill invoice. This is a special case where the buyer issues the invoice instead of the seller. It's used when you incur expenses from sources that you cannot provide a Malaysian invoice. Common examples include paying a rent to an individual landlord, paying for utilities, or hiring a freelancer, like a plumber or technician who doesn't run a formal business. It is also mandatory for any purchases made from the foreign companies. Since foreign suppliers don't use the LHDM system, you must issue a self-bill invoice to prove your expenses to the government. Take note on the timing. The self-bill invoice must submit within 60 days, as after 60 days will have penalty. And lastly, this will be the 4 types of self-bill invoice. The first one will be normal self-billing, followed by self-bill for import, self-bill for payment, and lastly the consolidated self-bill. And that's all for the video today. Thank you for your watching.